Hi everyone, Spirit Halloween here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new TANGLED album, The Enduring Spirit. This is the fourth full-length LP from this Toronto, Ontario death metal outfit, who have stuck to a pretty classic and faithful old-school death metal sound over the years, and this record interestingly drops amongst a lot of notable death metal releases over the past month or so. You had Cannibal Corpse, Chaos Horrific, the new Cryptopsy record, As Gomorrah Burns, as well as a Dying Fetus's Make Them Beg for Death, all of which I was hoping to dig at least some thrills out of, but found them all to come up short in some way, shape, or form. The new Cryptopsy record ended up being a surprisingly lackluster comeback. It's a whole fucking mess. The riffs don't get me moving at all, and the mix makes the vocals and distortion sound pretty much like white noise. Meanwhile, with Cannibal Corpse, it's pretty much business as usual. 16 albums in, and they're pretty much still sticking with that same blunt, direct, brutal formula. You got speed, you have the occasional unhinged, crazy lead, and lots of thick, distorted riffs. And even if it's not new or exciting per se, it does work for them, especially since they do still continue to sport one of the best vocalists in the genre. However, it's still hard not to feel like the band is kind of going through the motions at this point, and not just because their last record was so fun and vicious and thrashy, but also because there's so little wiggle room for variety when you're operating in extremities, which was also for sure the case for the new Dying Fetus, which, if you listen to it, will be one of the fastest and most technically proficient metal records you'll hear this year, and I would expect nothing less from Dying Fetus at this point. But while I have loved hearing the band up the ante and get more flashy and intense over the years, the guitar work on this one was not as dizzying as what I heard on their last record, in my opinion. Not to mention the drums on this LP are mixed and arranged in such a way to where they just sound completely mechanical, and I think in comparison with previous records, the band is just kind of missing a bit of a human touch this time around. So again, with all those bands, I've loved some of their previous work and was hoping for a blowout in 2023. Meanwhile, the record that actually hit for me was this new one from TANGLED, which surprised me given that I just kind of felt like their previous stuff was more or less okay. But they really went all out on this record and showed that they could make a death metal album that could be dynamic without having to turn down the brutality, or could sound old school while bringing at least some new, weird, colorful, refreshing ideas to the table. As some of the guitar work on this thing is just incredible. Like with the demented and dissonant harmonies that open up the first track on the record, The Perfect Memory, which is for sure a lot to process right out of the gate with this record, but in a fun way. The time signature in 3/4 to come immediately after this intro is an interesting touch too. And the rest of this 4-minute rager is packed with super creative guitar phrasing and harmonies, during which TANGLED is still very much capable of generating a pretty horrid and evil sound. Cause while the phrasing may be colorful and rich, the guitar tones and distortion are still pretty oppressive and heavy. And the drums are pounding and tight as hell too, whether they're tossing out a quick blast beat switch up or pulling off a completely dizzying fill. The percussion is not only one of the most impressive aspects of this record, but seemingly it sounds live. How good the drums sound could really come down to either just amazing playing or very methodical production that actually takes care to respect like this natural flow of rhythm that doesn't insist every goddamn snare hit or kick drum strike sound equally as loud and compressed and high volume, which really helps the band as they move through multiple passages on these tracks that might be a little low key or tension building, very quick and detailed, and then eventually that gets like let go of in something that is slower and heavier and more visceral, or even grand. Some of the tracks on this record are even a little progressive too, as they do give you a lot to keep track of in terms of different riff switch ups and groove switch ups, builds, falls, transitions, but it's all organized really, really well. You really feel the roller coaster ride of changing intensities across these tracks. It doesn't feel like the band is just throwing out random riffs and squiggles and noisy freakouts just to have them out there. And again, that visceral and explosive feeling comes through whether you're committing every damn thing happening on the song to memory or not. And not to say that's an especially hard thing to do with this record, as there are a lot of unexpectedly memorable passages and changes throughout the track list here. Even during some of the most high octane and non-stop moments on the project, like Flesh's Armor. Like, for instance, you have this zany guitar solo in the first leg of Servants of Possibility that sounds the way being abducted by aliens must feel. You also have these grinding, sinister riffs, hits of guitar dissonance, and a bass breakdown in the midst of angelic fabrications. Also, the pristine chords and epic, soaring guitar solos at the start of Will of Whispers, which of course makes the super guttural vocals and heavier, distorted riffs to follow hit even harder. It's that classic ugly beauty contrast, and that juxtaposition kind of comes through as a theme in some of the lyrics on this track. Our tattered beauty held close to a corpse, all that provokes awe is sublime, time without haste, patience without release, you light your way to sorrow. Underneath the greater beauty and aura is where the truth begins. Experience both its calm and storm. I mean, as much as I do generally like reading lines in death metal about being impaled and having your head severed off with a chainsaw, cause that shit is hilarious, I do appreciate this album taking more of a cerebral angle on the lyrical end, as there are a lot of very heady and sorrowful themes throughout these tracks. As far as other spots on this thing that stuck out, of course, Fate's Tangled Thread, which does sound very tangled to an extent, with its knotty and web-like layers of guitar and bass. Also the various groove and riff changes throughout its almost 7-minute runtime. But the track also features some of the most badass and head-banging riff passages on the entire record, an anthemic and almost proggy guitar solo in the second half, and plus one of the closest things we get to a genuine refrain on the project. There is no place where I am not. Let's skip ahead to the epic 11-minute closer on the record, which has quite the progression across its runtime. Of course, it is a heavy and throttling first leg on this track, but eventually we hit this very clean and proggy but tasteful jam section that is genuinely moody and intoxicating, and I love the way the band kind of brings it back around to something heavier and more aggressive, ramping it up toward the finish. And I will say, in comparison with previous attempts to work some more melodic and low-key stuff into their records, I think Tomb Mold really kind of pulled it off best here. As far as a final note on the production, I will say there is a nice little touch of reverb on the whole thing too, giving us some extra space and atmosphere, especially on the vocals, which have a very growly, guttural tone to them, which of course is pretty essential for that death metal vibe and feel. I will say they could have used maybe a bit more variation across the record. Maybe the biggest thing holding the album back, as it's one of the more kind of run-of-the-mill elements of the album. But still, overall, I will say this is a great death metal record that finds more power and versatility than just constant, non-stop bluntness, which has a time and has a place if you can pull it off well and make it engaging from front to back on a record. But Tomb Mold went a little bit in the opposite direction and still showed that you could make a really killer album in this lane that has a nice bit of contrast to it. I'm feeling a decent 2-strong-8 on this one. Tran, Zishin, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Tomb Mold, forever.